David Bowie, I think, there to get us started. Thank you very much indeed. It's a great pleasure to be here. Welcome all. So we've got a large and highly attentive audience for this discussion on the 2024 US elections. I should just briefly say that, to paraphrase George Orwell, all US elections are unique, but some are more unique than others. And I think it's probably fair to say that 2024 definitely is one of the more remarkable elections we've ever had. I'll spare you all of the historical strangeness about it, the uniqueness of it, the fact that we have the first time in more than 100 years, two former presidents contesting the election. The oldest and the second oldest man ever to have been elected to the office deciding that they're fit for another 4 years at the job. One of the candidates, of course, under criminal indictment, and the other one facing grave questions about his presidency and about his capabilities. So there's so much, obviously, to discuss. We could go into all angles of it, but we've got such not only a gifted and talented group of people with us, we've got a group that is actually representative of quite a wide range of backgrounds. And so I'm going to kick this off. I'm going to let them have at it, actually, for the next hour. Remember, of course, please do present your questions. The QR code, you'll be familiar with the drill. Please present your questions. I'd love to come to your questions, too. But I'm going to start off with by letting everybody have an attempt to answer this question. I've been covering US elections, despite my accent. I've lived here in the US for 30 years. I've been covering US elections. This is my 10th presidential election. And I think it's fair to say that every single presidential election I've covered, the candidates, their supporters, the media describe it as the most important election of my lifetime. In fact, you can hear that so often you become a little jaded by it and think, well, actually, all we really have is the most important presidential election since the last one. But actually, as for reasons that we all know, this is a pretty significant year and there is a lot at stake. So I want to start by asking the panel, and I'll start, just each of you to give 2 or 3 minutes, and I will keep you to that because we don't want to take up too much time. What it is you think that is at stake in this election? What is at stake? And you've got different backgrounds: policy, polling, strategy. You come from different political, ideological backgrounds. But tell me what you think is really at stake in this election. And if you wish, you can say it's the most important presidential election of your lifetime. And I'm going to start with you, Kellyanne.
Thank you very much, Jerry. And thank you for the Milken Institute for having me on this esteemed panel. Welcome, everyone. There is a bright line distinction between the two parties. I've never seen such a distinction with a difference policy-wise. And sometimes that's as reflected in our governance and our policies as are the divisions across our nation. We're a pretty divided country in many different ways. So it's no surprise that right now the Republicans control the House of Representatives by just a few seats. Democrats control the Senate by 1 seat. Our presidential elections are not decided by millions of votes across the nation. They're decided by thousands of votes across a handful of states. So policy-wise, what's at stake, Jerry? I would say the difference between fundamentally the government's relationship with the individual. And I think spending is at stake, regulation, taxes. If Trump is elected, he'll want to extend the Tax Cut and Jobs Act that Speaker Ryan was so helpful in helping to pass. President Biden has promised very recently he might do a 44% capital gains tax. So I think voters can see the differences. I think looking down the line a little bit, abortion is a vote motivator and a turnout intensifier for the Democrats. Even if it doesn't pop in the top 3 or 5 issues in any statewide poll, it's very important this year to many voters. But I think it's really the economic security, everyday affordability, national security, border security, which has become a much bigger issue to a much wider swath of Americans than when Donald Trump elevated, quote, illegal immigration into the consciousness 9 years ago. Now when it's discussed as border security and it's closer to people's backyards, it's very high in the polls. It's number 1 or number 2, along with inflation and the economy in all 7 swing states. The courts, Jerry, are always at stake. And I think the agencies, obviously, foreign policy, national security, we're in 2 new wars. And the last thing I'll mention is, even though the federal government should not be involved in everything, that's clear, there is this quest in this country to have people in Washington, beginning in the Oval, to give more voice and visibility to what vexes and perplexes them closer to home. So they are talking about education and school choice. They are talking about crime and policing. And it'd be easy for Washington to say, well, that's not even a state issue, those are local issues. But there tends to be, when you listen to people in focus groups, when you read the polls very carefully, they do think there's a role for anybody in a position of power and authority to help with that as well.
Great, and you did it in under 3 minutes. Thank you, Kellyanne. Van Jones, what's at stake in your view?
Strong man in the White House, weaker women at home. That's how I would divide it. This strongman politics, overt strongman politics from a restored President Trump, and women weaker because of even more rollbacks when it comes to abortion. That's what I think the basic stakes are. But since I was shorter, I will challenge you on the uniqueness of this election. Anybody got like a weird friend that thinks we're all living in a simulacrum? Anybody got any weird friends? Okay, me and you. So look, this is as much like a glitch in the Matrix where whoever's in charge of the simulacrum has redone 68. 1968, you had an unpopular Democratic president, Johnson. We've got Biden. An unpopular war, Vietnam. We've got Gaza. You had a new technology that was showing images that shocked the public, color television with Vietnam, TikTok with Gaza. You have students protesting, outraged, upset. That's happening now across the board. The Democratic convention was in Chicago. A guy named Bobby Kennedy jumped in the race. And Nixon won. So if you're for Trump, you may like that. If you're like me, you don't like it. But we have been here before in some aspects. And what you don't have, for all the division and the polarization, you don't have leaders being assassinated. What you don't have is armed conflict on our campuses. But you do have this moment of choosing for the country. Trump has been very clear. If he's president, he's going to act in ways that no president has acted before, including being willing to sic the DOJ on people, fire attorney generals that don't do what he says. That would be a radical departure from what we've had before. And more rights are up for grabs when it comes to, for women. So I'm still under time.
Well, can I just push you then a bit? Because since you've got a little bit of time, I thought you were going to say, as the president says, and as a lot of Democrats say, democracy is at stake.
Yes, that's what I mean. It's a strong. I say strongman politics because it makes a little bit more sense to ordinary people. But yeah, democracy's on the line, and rights for women are on the line.
Okay, Chris Liddell.
Yes, a slightly different perspective. Overcoming the curse of the second term. So history shows that second-term presidencies generally massively underperform expectations, and as you mentioned, we've got the unique situation of the first time in 130-odd years. Either way, it's going to be a second term for someone. And given the multitude of issues that the presidency is going to have to face, and a reasonable chance of a contested election of some form, so a difficult transition, how they manage that is going to be incredibly important. So a couple of observations from either side. I mean, President Biden has the benefit of incumbency, but also the challenge of incumbency. So he not only has to win the election, he has to govern at the same time. So he comes in, as most second terms do, exhausted, or more exhausted certainly than the challenger. Generally speaking, second terms go for consolidation. At the very time that they should be doubling down, they consolidate and therefore lose momentum. And then one of his big strengths from the first term, which is his relatively low turnover of his staff, is going to probably come back as a negative, which he's almost certainly going to have high turnover of his key people. So he's got a big set of challenges against a potentially split Congress or a very tight margin Congress and a big set of issues globally. President Trump, on the flip side, has all the benefits of a first term, because he has the knowledge of a first term without the challenges of having to govern, but he has, on the flip side, something equally challenging, which is this concept of measuring the drapes and this aversion to actually getting prepared. So with all the things that he's going to have to do to be ready by January 20th, he needs to overcome the natural resistance to actually doing that. And the second thing for him is people. And so, contrary to popular opinion, there are a lot of very competent people who want to serve President Trump, but there's equally a lot of not so competent people. And so it is going to make a huge difference from the country's point of view who he chooses to be in his key staff. So for me, the critical aspect is more of a how than a what. Are we going to have a fully functioning government on January 20th to deal with potentially a very difficult transition period and the multitude of issues that the country will be facing at that stage?
A quick follow-up to you, if I may, Chris. You worked in the first Trump White House. There's been a lot of reporting on what Trump may do in a second term, particularly with regard to governance, to the functioning of government, to the staffing of an administration and all of that, changing a lot of the ways in which the administration is staffed, more and more political appointees. What's your sense? Do you think that's right? That would be what the second Trump administration would do?
He has a very big agenda, and he has the potential to implement a large part of that agenda if he gets organized. And one of the other benefits, I was trying to keep under 3 minutes, but Heritage Foundation and American First Policy Institute have done a lot of the pre-work, or the preconditions to actually having a big agenda and a huge wave from day one of momentum. So if he wants to take advantage of it, and if he organizes well, and he chooses the right people, he can have an extremely big first year.
Thank you. Jim Messina, what's at stake?
We're at 183 days before the election, but who's counting? And if you think about it, we're Americans, so we're arrogant, and we think our election's the most important of our lifetime. But you can argue this is the most important year in the history of democracy around the world. 80% of democracies have an election this year. Over 2 billion people are going to the polls. We will have a new generation of leaders. And when you look at what's happening around the world, you know, the US is usually about 6 months behind the waves. Brexit happened, Trump happened 6 months later. And right now we're involved in 4 presidential elections around the world, and we're really seeing 2 very interesting things that are going to sweep across this country. The first is migration has become the biggest issue in world politics. And you just saw that in the Netherlands, where the polls were once again wrong. A guy who was in 4th place ended up winning. You see this in Mexico, you see this in Argentina, you see it all over the place. And so how and we'll talk about this in a second, both campaigns handle this issue and the abortion issue really could define this election. The second thing is the rise of the 3rd and 4th and 5th political parties that are starting to win elections all over the place. The only place in the Western democracy that doesn't have a 3rd or 4th party is the United States. That is incredibly important because that anger doesn't have a way out. It doesn't, and Kennedy's trying to offer the way out. But that anger, we were talking backstage, is really in both parties. There really are 2 Democratic parties, there are 2 Republican parties, and going back and forth inside of it, the average voter looks at both parties and says, why in the fuck are you spending all this time debating each other and not debating what to make our people's lives better? When I ran President Obama's campaign, Bill Clinton would call me up every month at 2 o'clock in the morning and tell me the single truest thing, which is anywhere in the world, every presidential election is always an economic referendum on the future. I would propose, Jerry, this could be the first election where that's not true. That economic voters that he and I fought over in 2012 are now, the Democrats believe it's about abortion, the Republicans believe it's about immigration, and these voters who are in these 6, you could argue 7 states, are wondering when anyone's going to start talking to them about how to make their kids' lives better. And I think that's the challenge that both campaigns face 183 days out.
Thank you. Paul, as Jim just said, you ran on a presidential ticket in 2012. You lost. Forgive me for pointing that out.
Thanks for reminding me.
So am I right in assuming...
No, we won that election.
So am I right in assuming that wasn't the most important presidential election of our lifetimes? But so what do you think is at stake here this time?
Okay, so being the last guy speaking, I'd say at this stage in the 21st century, I think democracy is being tested in 2 very specific ways. One from within, our polarization, eating each other alive. Can we reach consensus to solve our big problems? The second one from without by the authoritarian, regimes who are basically saying they got the mojo, they can make the decisions faster, they can beat democracy at growing their nations. So it's basically authoritarianism, tyranny against freedom and democracy. I think the next president is going to face a couple of crises, probably a debt crisis. Both of these guys, Trump and Biden, are terrible on this issue. I'm an anti-establishment Republican, so Trump's the establishment. So I'm like one of these unicorn people I'm against Biden on policy and Trump on character, so I'm kind of in this no man's land. But I think a debt crisis is very possible once the Fed is done cutting interest rates. And there's going to have to be some entitlement reform that's going to have to be done to deal with this debt, likely a commission. I think it's most likely we have divided government. No one party is going to run everything. That means we're not going to have reconciliation. They're not going to have reconciliation. So you're going to have some divided government consensus on this, probably a fiscal commission. I think we're going to get consensus on what to do with China as a party. It looks different under Trump than Biden, but with respect to Congress, I think you're getting a big Venn diagram that's occurring on how to deal with China. You do not get that Venn diagram between Trump and Biden and Republicans and Democrats on Ukraine and NATO, regretfully. I mean, we just had a great vote the other day, but if Trump's president, I think, you're asking me to speculate, bad on NATO, bad on alliances, bad on Europe, my opinion, bad on trade. Fighting China on trade is one thing, but fighting your allies, not getting TPP, not getting trade with your allies, which is probably the best China policy we could have. He won't do that. Biden might have, like Obama, a second term, change of opinion on trade and do some good policy there. Hopefully he will. I don't know that he would do that or not. He's not the same guy. But I think you're going to see debt crisis, and then immigration is obviously a huge issue. If we get those two issues as Americans, you secure your border, you have an immigration system that meets the needs of our economy without depressing people's wages, and you get entitlements under control and you dodge a debt crisis, we're going to have a great century. Just fix those two, and then we'll figure the other ones out. So Biden's going to be better on better on alliances, probably foreign policy. Trump is going to be better on taxes, on regulations, and they're both really bad on fiscal policy with respect to.
So in an ideal world, they both come together in a moment of national unity.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, sure. Let's do that.
I think that's probably your.
And divided government.
Okay.
Yeah.
Let's talk about the campaign then. Exactly as Jim says, we're exactly 6 months away today from the election. Kellyanne, let me talk to you first about the strengths and weaknesses of the candidates and where you see it right now. One of the unique, and I stand by my unique remark, the unique aspects of this election is we do have two, I won't say unpopular, but two candidates who are obviously with very evident flaws and who are regarded in some low esteem by large sections of the electorate. In fact, it's often said that Joe Biden is the only Democrat that Donald Trump could lose to, and Donald Trump is the only Republican that Joe Biden could lose to. What do you say, as you look at it from your polling perspective, on the issues, on the candidates, what are going to be the key things? And again, we seem to be once again on a knife edge in this election. Trump does seem to have an advantage in the swing states. But what are the things in the next 6 months that are going to determine how the campaign goes?
Sure, the issue set could not be more clear, but it was very clear in 2022, and many of the Republican candidates came up short because they didn't finish their sentences. Donald Trump will probably finish his sentences. The following are not sentences: inflation, crime, Biden, dementia, the border, Putin, you name it. Those are barely words. So if you don't complete the sale, you're leaving on the table self-identified independent voters, Jerry, who had a somewhat disapproving view of Joe Biden. In 9 of the 10 swing Senate states in 2022, all but one, Wisconsin, Senator Ron Johnson, the Democrats won all. These are among independents who have a somewhat disapproving view of Joe Biden. Why is that important? Well, most of the people in the disapproval category have a strongly disapproval rating of Joe Biden. But if you're talking about a knife's edge in these elections, the candidates need to get smarter. It's going to be security, all kinds of security. That means security, freedom from harm, drugs, violence, random violence, a lot of stuff that's going on in our big cities that bothers people. The cities aren't going to not vote Democratic, but folks living away from the cities, watching what's happening there, they're going to vote according to what's happening in the cities. But it's all kinds of security: border security, national security, our standing in the world. A is affordability. everyday cost of living inflation. It started out with gas and groceries, but it's really now about insurance, which is way up. Health insurance is up, regular insurance is up, utilities, repairs, maintenance. People cannot afford everyday life. And the CNN poll that recently said Trump is beating Biden by 11 points among young people, that same CNN poll had Biden winning third by 31 points among young people in the same point in April of 2020. That's a big swing. That's got less to do with Biden's age than his agenda. What's in it for them? When will they be able to avail themselves of the natural accoutrements of an adult life? When are they getting their first home? When can they feel comfortable adding someone to the household payroll, meaning a spouse and children? And I think cravenly saying, I'm forgiving your student loan debt was a quick political fix, albeit unconstitutional.
Kellyanne, I want to let everybody else chime in on this.
I understand, but let me just say one thing.
Yeah,
The
no, but there's
attributes
one
are
particular thing I want to
important. I want to say one thing. Attributes are important. Yeah. The attribute testing, to my surprise, favors Trump over Biden. What is the attribute testing? In the CNN poll and the NBC poll, they're asking questions the way you ask them as a voter. Forget the horse race numbers. Trump's way ahead he's ahead in the swing states. That's less important than who has a plan on inflation, who has a plan on immigration, who has the energy, acuity, agility, and ability to be president, who cares about people like you, who can handle a crisis. In many of those, Trump is winning by double digits. In some of them, it's more narrow within the margin of error. But those attributes, if you're going to get a second term as Biden, you need to do better among some of those attributes.
So, Jim, let me ask you that, Jim, if I may. You've advised a few winning campaigns, and the president is obviously facing a very strong uphill challenge. The question was, Kelly actually kind of partly answered it, but I want to put the same question to you that's the question about attributes. I've heard it said from Democrats that Democrats are simply going to hammer home Donald Trump, indicted, possibly convicted, January 6th, tried to overturn an election. They're just going to hammer that, and then, oh, and by the way, abortion maybe here and there too. But it'll be about Biden's path to victory lies through telling people you cannot let this man be president again. Is that right?
No. I don't think that can be the only thing. Americans are dreamers. Americans want to hear what you're going to do to make their lives better. Why have the polls closed in the month since State of the Union? Because he laid out a very clear, very popular agenda and looked very strong doing it, and that's why the polls have closed. So there's this stupid argument in my party about, do you turn out the base or do you talk to persuadable voters? We can walk and chew gum at the same time, and we have to win a presidential election. But step back for a sec. Talk about attributes all you want, but who are these people, right? America is the most partisan country in the world. According to the Marist NPR poll, 2% of Americans are undecided. 2%. So we're talking about these swing voters in 6 states. His state is the most swing state of all of them. When you look at the simulations, Wisconsin decides the election 79% of the time, so we should just shut up and ask him what's going to happen. Okay. But when you look at who these voters are, they think about politics 4 minutes a week. They have 2.6 jobs, and 60-some% of them are women, mostly single women. And they really want both of these candidates to talk about how they're going to make their lives better, the questions that he was laying out. And right now, Trump famously, I was so happy when he said this, that he didn't want any Nikki Haley voters, didn't want any of those people. Trump's whole theory is I'm going to maximize the base. And why I think if you're playing Texas Hold'em, which I love very deeply, you look at the two cards and you'd rather have Biden's cards than Trump's cards today. And that is because in the 3 Midwestern states to get Biden to exactly 270 electoral votes, including Wisconsin, 6 of the last 7 presidential elections, the Democrats have won it. Now, they're all going to be really close, but when you start looking at what's happened since Donald Trump and Kellyanne's amazingly good campaign in 2016, every single election since Trump became the leader of his party, Republicans have lost seats. And in part, one last thing, it's because he can't spend all his time doing what she wants him to do. He can't shut his mouth and stay on message. And he just inflames these voters in a way that make it really hard.
One of the interesting ironies here, and Van, I want to ask you about this, and it's particularly relevant in Wisconsin. I've been looking at the numbers in Wisconsin, is the demographic factor. And I'm old enough to remember a book 20-odd years ago called The Emerging Democratic Majority, which was about how the country was becoming less white, especially thanks to significant immigration and, of course, population growth, particularly among Latinos, that the population was going to be much more diverse. it is very striking that, and everybody thought they all vote Democrat, so the Democrats are going to have this sort of permanent majority. It turns out that didn't work out like that. And by the way, and it's kind of, and the reason I mentioned Wisconsin is ironic. Wisconsin is 78% white, and yet it is the state, as Jim says now, where Biden is kind of, seems to be like pinning a lot of his hopes. If you look at some of those other swing states, Georgia, Arizona, and Nevada, where Trump seems to be doing very well, in fact, developing a significant lead, they're 50% white. So what's happened, Van, in terms of the demographics? Why Trump does seem to be appealing to significant numbers, particularly of Latino voters, but also black men. What's going on?
The Obama-Biden coalition is in trouble. It's in trouble. And I get beat up every time I say it, but it's obvious that it's in trouble. And it has to do with a number of things. Number one, the white working class guys left for your campaign in 2016, the Democratic Party. And now black and Latin working class guys are following along. And they don't have to follow in massive numbers. Again, this is razor edge stuff. So, I mean, listen, the vast majority of black people are going to vote for President Biden. The vast majority of black women are going to vote for President Biden. The vast majority of black men are going to vote for President Biden, but that's not the point. The point is you have a margin that is hurting and uncertain among black and Latin men as to whether we have a place in this party. It's not easy to talk about, but there is a sense among a lot of guys that you talk to that they're just tired of being lectured, tired of being wrong, tired of being criticized, tired of being called toxic, tired of, frankly, a lot of other groups getting more out of the Biden administration than black folks got. Nobody wants to talk about this, but the reality is when black men went to vote for Biden, black men were hoping for something on police reform, George Floyd, zero, zilch, nunca, nada, nothing. Wanted something on voting rights, the John Lewis Voting Rights Act, zero, zilch, nunca, nada, nothing. Wanted more progress, building on both Biden and Trump's progress on criminal justice reform. Hoped that for the Equal Act, which would finally equalize crack and powder cocaine, one of the most outrageous pieces of blatant racial discrimination in the criminal justice. Zero, zilch, nunca, nada, nothing for black male voters. And yet, if someone says, Jesus, maybe it seems like we're not that important to you, then we get beat up on how bad Trump is. But we also, if you're a guy, you're just getting beat up all the time anyway. And so I think people are going to be surprised. I hear all this talk about, frankly, suburban women, and they always get a ton of attention and, frankly, a ton of money. But Milwaukee matters in Wisconsin. Philadelphia matters in Pennsylvania, and Detroit matters in Michigan. And let's not forget, in 2016, there were, I think, Trump won, well, you guys won about 10,000 in Michigan, something like that?
77,000 in those 3 states.
Yeah. So not that much in Michigan. There were 50, 60,000 black voters in Detroit alone that had voted twice for Obama, that just didn't vote at all for Hillary Clinton. There was enough Obama voters that just didn't vote in Michigan that gave Michigan to Trump last time. So you have a screaming problem over here. People waving the arms, saying, we're not happy. This sucks. We'd like some attention. We're having problems. And you can go to 1,000 conversations about the party and black men aren't mentioned. And this is a problem. Now, it's a problem that can be solved, and we can talk about how to solve it. But this is a problem. And, the Latin community, the men, are in a similar posture. And so, I guess the thing I want to just kind of round the corner on is also the vast majority of young people in this country are not caught up in the Gaza stuff and this, that, and the other. But there has become a jihad chic, an intifada chic, that has begun to infect the edges of the Democratic coalition. And that can become a problem in Michigan and other places as well. And so this is a problem. And I don't think that the people understand the depth of the grassroots commitment beyond the parties, beyond the campaigns. Frankly, in the black community, our black media does not get enough money from any of these campaigns because they say, well, you're going to vote for us anyway. We're going to spend money over here on the marginal voters. So black media doesn't get money. Black turnout doesn't get money until the very end. And people don't understand, you had a big, thick layer built up during the Obama years that has been starved. And so people think that the black community is going to go out, that black women, frankly, the aunts and the grandmas, are going to be able to go out and drag their nephews and their sons and their grandsons to the polls as easily as they did before, with less money, less investment, more pain, more frustration. They're wrong. And I say it now, we'll be back here a year from now, and you'll see it in the numbers. But this coalition is in trouble. It can be fixed, but only if you recognize it's in trouble.
Paul, let me ask you, following on a little bit from this, the Republican Party, 3 years ago after January the 6th, after the election, I think it was a pretty widely held view in the sort of top ranks of the Republican Party that Trump was going to go away. They didn't really think he was going to come back. I think it was a lot of wishful thinking. I think that's one of the reasons a lot of people didn't vote for his, for his conviction in the Senate. They just thought he would go away. Not only has he come back, it is his party. It is, maybe you'll disagree with that. How did the Republican Party, in such a short space of time, go from being the party that, you know, Romney, Ryan, Bush, whatever you want to Donald Trump? And how is the, if you like, the continuing disaffection that we sometimes see with like Nikki Haley voters, the old, if you like, Republican Party, how might that affect Trump's prospects?
Well, first let me correct you. You're mispronouncing it. It's pronounced Wisconsin.
So I'm sorry.
To the nose, all right?
I've only just learned how to pronounce Nevada.
Wisconsin.
It's taken me 20 years to pronounce Nevada. So, sorry, Wisconsin.
Well, okay, to answer your question, I was going to go to your earlier point about Wisconsin, but
well, we come to that. But
populism. The answer is populism has overtaken, and it's Nikki Haley, before she got out of the race, was, I think, head-to-head. National polls I'm not a big fan of, but for the sake of this argument, it works. She was beating Biden by like 16 points, I think. So there's an intact Republican coalition, a country that prefers center-right policies to Biden, and we were going to sweep Congress and the White House like Reagan over Carter if we had Nikki Haley. So that's what an intact Republican Party looks like in an election like that. That's not what we have. MAGA has basically taken over our party. It is the establishment, and it has pushed people like me out because it's populism untethered to any form of principle, but to a cult of personality. And, you know, he's running the party like, you know, it's like a Don Corleone type of story. So everybody who has ambition in front of them in Congress is afraid. They're afraid of criticizing because they'll be primaried. They're afraid of criticizing because he or one of his surrogates will go after them. So there's a lot of just, you know, complicity. Speaking about Wisconsin, I think Kellyanne's right about the issues. The issues are completely our issues. They got one issue, abortion. It's a powerful issue, but we have every other issue. And I was in Hy-Vee yesterday in Janesville, my hometown, which is a very Democrat, UAW town. Hy-Vee is a grocery store, big Democrat town. I went in just to grab something fast. It took me 45 minutes to get out of there. People still think I represent the area. And every question from a Democrat town, mostly UAW retirees, was about the border or economics or inflation. It wasn't about abortion. It wasn't about January 6th. It was about those issues. Biden won Wisconsin by 20,000 votes. Correct me if I get the numbers wrong, Kelly. 63,000 basically Republicans in Wisconsin voted for every other Republican on the ballot in 2020, but didn't, you know, vote for Trump. 20,000 of those people voted for Trump. 43,000 of them just didn't vote for the presidential or wrote somebody in. That's how Biden won in Wisconsin. And my district's the most, my old district's the most swing seat in the state. I had represented a lot of the Milwaukee suburbs. One other district represented the other ones. That's where these people come from. We call it the WOW counties, the counties that wrap around Milwaukee. And it's college-educated suburban voters who are pretty stable economically, frankly. But that's what matters to them, I'd say, the economy. And they could afford to vote against Trump on economics, even though they thought he would be better for them for economics because of character. They thought Biden was going to be a moderate. He wasn't. He went left. He gave the progressives the keys to the castle. And so now they're sort of betwixt and between. The polls are dead. I mean, Trump's got a little bit of an edge, but they're just dead heat. So the question is, do these disaffected people in the WOW counties who are probably pretty stable economically, but that's mostly what they're thinking about, but can afford to vote against Trump on character again. Will they vote for Biden now that he's not the moderate they thought he was, but he's this liberal? Or is there a third party out there that just peels a bunch of votes away? That happens a lot in Wisconsin. We vote for third parties fairly often. Perot did really well. You know, so that's the question, what it comes down to. I still think Trump can't win, but Biden can lose. Meaning Trump's polling at his peak, pretty much in all the swing states. He's basically polling at the best he has, at the best he can get, and Biden's underperforming everywhere. And so the question is, can Biden go back and rebuild that vote coalition he had, or not? And that's the key question of all of it. At the end of the day, in my state, I think you guys win, probably. Jim, I'm talking to the Democrat here. I think because their party is just better organized. They're so much better organized than we are on the ground right now. I don't like saying this. Our party was a juggernaut.
Literally a juggernaut.
Just 8 years ago. But they are so much better organized than we are. So my guess is they probably pull it out at the end. But if Biden can't get to the middle, I don't know for the life of me why he's chasing these left-wing voters. He's going to get them. Trump's going to deliver those voters for him. He's chasing the wrong voters. And so if he doesn't pivot soon, my guess is Trump wins it.
Chris, I want to bring in you, and you're a policy guy.
But I assume he pivots.
You're a policy guy, particularly. And do these policies, Paul again has talked about, we've all talked about them, you know, voter concern about immigration, about inflation in particular. Those seem to be the two big issues. Abortion, we know too, but insofar as, you know, what an administration may do. And again, from your perspective, from your experience in administration, do you think that if they are salient, that the voters are being given the most convincing messages about how to deal with those problems? Do you think that they will in the end vote on the basis of that? Or are we going to be, is it going to be an attributes election, essentially?
Yeah, I think you can get lost in the policy. To me, 75%, Jim or Kellyanne will know the exact number, of the country think it's on the wrong track. And that number's been getting progressively worse over the last few years. And whenever people answer that question, whatever the policy issue that is important to them is in the back of their mind. So you can argue about which policy that is, but if 75% of the country think it's on the wrong track, and you have one party who's basically offering disruption and one party who's offering more of the same, it's pretty much impossible for me to see how more of the same wins in that particular instance. So I think it's absolutely a policy issue, but the policies differ, and it differs depending on the person. But basically, there's a deep sense of discontent in the country with whatever issue is important to, whether it's the black community, whether it's on any other industrial policy or anything, and most people consider the country to be going on the wrong track. So to me, and that's not just peculiar to the United States, that's true of most Western democracies. So it favors the person who's coming in and offering a different alternative. It's as simple as I can find it from a policy.
Thank you. We've got a lot of questions from the audience, and some of them I was going to come to. But Kellyanne, I do want to come to you on, I'm sorry, it's back on the Trump question, especially on the attributes question. We're watching literally day by day Trump going through this trial in New York. We still don't know, it seems unlikely, whether the federal trials in particular will actually get to court before the election. It seems unlikely, but you never know. I keep reading polls that say, in fact, I think there was one today, saying that if Trump is convicted, you know, even in this New York case, which I think a lot of people do acknowledge is one of the weakest of the cases, it would significantly reduce their likelihood of voting for him. Is that just somebody saying something hypothetical to a pollster? Should Trump be convicted, or indeed if he isn't, if this spectacle of these trials goes on, is there any evidence, have you seen any evidence at all that it really will impact voters? I'm not talking about hardcore Republicans or hardcore Democrats, swing voters' willingness to vote for him.
A couple of things. People don't like to engage in hypotheticals when they're facing real problems right in front of them every single day. So President Trump, look, I was the first person to tell President Trump he was going to get indicted in the Stormy Daniels case because I had testified twice to the grand jury that week, pay my own legal bills. I had dinner with him and I said, "You're going to get indicted." He said, "What?" And I said, "Not based on the answers I provided. It certainly wasn't a campaign strategy. That's silly." Mm-hmm. If I had $130,000 laying around, I would have run 2 more ads in Michigan and Wisconsin. Wouldn't have paid these people. And anyway, that aside, he said, "Some people think that would be good for me, politically, and I said, well, Mr. President, if in your lifetime you ever have a choice between being indicted and not indicted, you pick door number 2. And he said, I know that, but he did have a point, didn't he, Jerry? I don't think that these indictments and the constant weaponization against him, what a lot of people see as prosecution, as persecution, and not just his quote base. If this were a base election, he would not be beating the sitting president in 7 swing states. Let me just say that. But I do think it cemented his rise. It helped him in the primary.
Totally.
And I want to say something quickly about this, Jerry, that encapsulates everything we're discussing today. Democrats made a mistake by not letting RFK Jr. stay in the Democratic Party. They said, there won't be any debates. We don't recognize you as a candidate. You're not going to get the resources everybody else gets. The RNC had to do that with the other candidates. They had debates. They shared their lists and their donors with the candidates. And Trump's stronger as a nominee because he won a competitive primary against some impressive men and women. The Democrats should have kept RFK Jr. in there. And I think this is a more important question long-term than what happens to Trump for this reason. Ross Perot got 19% of the vote in 1992, the strongest third-party candidate we've had presidentially in our lifetimes. But he got 0, I want to repeat, 0 electoral votes. Bill Clinton got 68.8% of the electoral votes in 1992. He got 43% of the popular vote. And that just tells you all you need to know about the threat of third parties and the 71% of Americans who want somebody other than Trump and Biden, and will this affect that, will that affect that? A lot of it's been baked. I would have kept RFK Jr. in the party because he's more of a threat now out of it. And why is that important? I can't think of a state he can win. Okay, you want to talk about somebody who's successful as the insurgent within his party? That's Bernie Sanders, 2016. He won 23 contests. You forgot that because nobody likes to talk about it. He won 13 million votes. He won 23 contests. He beat Hillary in races in states that we ended up beating Hillary in later on. He had softened the ground for us. That's a real victory. That's a real challenge. I can't think of a state RFK Jr. can win. It's May. Maybe he will. But he's going to be a spoiler. And so the question is, he is there. He's not hypothetical. I don't see the Biden people, I know plenty of them, some of them are colleagues of mine, I don't see them doing any course correction on the issues that people are saying matter to them. CNN had a poll last week, Jerry, asking if Trump's convicted in the documents case, still 50-50. If he's convicted about January 6th, still 50-50. These are CNN polls. I think they're probably going to axe their pollster in their budget soon. But we'll see. It's a hypothetical. If the other side of the coin is this, Jerry, if Trump beats the weakest case, they started with the weakest case because that's what arrogance and ignorance does to people. Turns out he's not the only person with an ego and an appetite. CEG, the people in Georgia, the prosecutors. If Donald Trump gets a hung jury somehow in New York, he'll be stronger than ever. And if I can give you one word in closing about this election that people see, it's strength. The opposite of strength is weakness. The opposite of strength is failure. Americans want strength.
You mentioned RFK Jr. I would point out, by the way, that Ross Perot did get 19% of the vote after he dropped out of the race.
Yes, in the summer, came back.
During the summer, he was actually ahead in the polls, as you know, at one point, with 35% of the vote. But let me ask you, Jim, because you mentioned him too. And one particular question about RFK, I'm sure Kellyanne's right that he's not going to do a Ross Perot, or let alone, previous third-party candidates who did better more than 100 years ago. But first question is ballot access, right? I mean, how many states is he actually going to get on?
Right, of the big six.
Yeah,
right, that's right. He's only in Michigan right now.
Yeah.
They're trying to get on some of the other ones, whether ballot access is hard. I don't think either party understands exactly what he's going to do and who he hurts, because you have both the RNC and the DNC suing to stop him in some of these places. Yeah. So let's not pretend he's only a Democratic problem. He's a problem for both. In fact, I think in the end he's a bigger problem for Trump, and here's why. When you look at Democrats who could leave, because Kellyanne's right, he's going to take votes from someone. It is unlikely that Democrats who are pro-choice and pro-vax are going to go for a guy who is anti-choice and crazy on vaccination. It's just going to be easier once you define him to push him out with Democratic voters, and I think Kellyanne's going to have a problem because, as Paul points out, there's 15% of the party who's still voting for Nikki Haley in these primaries, and she hasn't been on in the race in a month. There's a whole bunch of Republicans who don't want to vote for Trump, who will go someplace else and have a good place for it. Because this election, the number that I look at the closest are these double doubter voters. This will be
Double haters.
double haters. Yep, that's right. Because if you think about it, when Barack Obama got to 50% in 2012 in October, I knew the election was over. Neither one of these candidates are going to get near 45% approval rating. That means between 10 and 15% of Americans who cast ballots are going to vote for someone they don't like. In the election that Joe Biden beat Donald Trump in, Joe Biden won those voters by 12 points in an election he barely won in the swing states. And so those are the voters that we're going to be watching every day to see. And I think Kennedy matters most in that context.
Yeah, I would say I don't think the court cases hurt Trump at all. I think as a non-Trump guy, I think these New York things are bogus. I think they're ridiculous. It's lawfare. And almost every Republican will say that.
Even the documents case?
No, that's a legitimate one. That's going to happen later. So I'm discounting that because that's after the election. I assume the delays are such that it's inconsequential. But I think it's just, I mean, as a person who's been on the ballot 11 times in Wisconsin, I think it's going to come down to the economy.
Yeah.
If Jay Powell, for some reason, has to hike, Biden's screwed. If the word stagflation is floating around, Biden's screwed. But if it's kind of where it is right now, where unemployment's below 4%, inflation maybe isn't tamed yet, but it's not getting much worse, then people will vote more character, and that's where Trump loses. But I think it comes down to that at the end of the day.
I mean, my question to you, Jim, is: has the president ever won re-election with this level of this low an approval rating?
I don't think so, but I don't think none of that matters, right? 'Cause you have two incumbents against each other.
Two incumbents.
Okay.
Jerry, I want to do one more thing on the court cases, because I think people are asking the wrong question. This is why I hate polls. Like, they're asking the question, would this matter to you? That's not the point. The point is these swing voters who think about politics 4 minutes a week are now seeing every day Donald Trump in a courtroom wailing away, going crazy in front of the cameras, saying crazy things. And both, they don't like Biden's age, and they don't like how crazy Trump is. And these voters think to themselves, do I really want 4 more years of this? And this is Donald Trump's problem with the court cases, not whether he's convicted or not, because I think people have made up their minds about that stuff. The problem is he's reminding them of the stuff that they dumped him in the first place. He lost a re-election in an election he never should have lost. He was the first incumbent who didn't have a primary in our lifetime who lost a general election, in part because he just couldn't shut the fuck up. And now, every day he's in court talking, and he's just, these swing voters, I watch them every night, are just like, please, both of you, shut up and talk about the economy.
Van, Chris, do you want anything on either?
I just want to push back on Paul on
Yeah,
the economy side. I mean, I think more of the same is a negative for most people. No one. Yeah,
I think at this stage, that swing voter in the suburbs, they'll vote Biden still, I think.
You can point to all the lovely statistics about unemployment and everything, but people aren't feeling it.
No, I agree with that, but it's not.
So no one's happy with the economy.
The voter on the margin of the economy is going to definitely
if
vote
it stays
for Trump.
where it is at the moment, I don't think people vote on character at all.
Van, on this or on RFK Jr., third party, whatever.
Yeah, I mean, I think we're going to be sitting here next year talking about very different things because we're acting like this is an election that's like the ones before, but there are two things that are very different. One is AI and the level and kinds of disinformation and misinformation that we're going to be hit with. It's going to be very, very different than anything. You're going to get a phone call from your pastor telling you that because there are armed men at the voting booths, we're going to talk to the mayor, you can vote tomorrow. And it will be your pastor's voice, and it will be a complete lie, and you're going to have massive impacts from that. That's all cheap and easy to do. I could do it right now if you wanted me to. It's literally pennies cheap. So we're going to be going into an information, disinformation environment unlike anything that we've seen. We need to be thinking about that ahead of time. Also, Trump's not going to give up. So even if, I agree with you, asking people to vote for the status quo right now is hard. Look, I talk to people every day. Asking people to vote for the status quo right now is hard. I think Biden could get them to do it because the alternative could be so much worse. But asking people to vote for the status quo is hard. Biden has gotten too little credit for pulling off what you would have said was almost some kind of economic miracle in terms of actually getting to a soft landing where unemployment is low and inflation is coming down. That's a soft landing. The reason he's getting no credit for it is because the food prices are still too high, and housing prices are still too high. And so Biden has got to get more aggressive. He put together he said he's going to have to stick the SEC and the DOJ on these corporate grocers that are ripping everybody off. These corporate grocers should be ashamed of themselves. There is no reason in the world for food prices to be this high. All the supply chain stuff has been worked out. They are just ripping Americans off. And rather than Democrats dragging technology CEOs and beating them up, they should be beating up these corporate grocers that are ripping everybody off. So there's a lot of missed opportunities that.
Yeah, quickly, if you would. We've got 10 minutes left. I want a couple other topics.
I think I get a little bit more time.
Very quick.
So number one is, I agree with you that asking people to vote for the status quo is tough. Biden gets less credit than he should for his economic achievements because housing prices are too high. Janet Yellen should be beating the crap out of the Fed on that. He should be beating the crap out of the grocers on that. He's not doing it. It's not being seen. So that makes it tough. But you got two things that are different than 2016 or 2020. The AI disinformation piece is different, and the grassroots Republicans are different. What saved democracy last time? To make it simple for you, black women and white men. Black female voters in the Democratic Party worked their butt off to elect Biden, and it was white guys in the Republican Party at the grassroots level who defended those votes at great personal cost, including the president calling them and pushing on them and everything else. Most of those good white men who cared more about the Constitution than politics have gotten pushed to the side. Mm-hmm. And you have learned that if you stand up against the Trump folks, you're going to pay a price. Right. And so you do not have the protections that we used to have, both on the information side and on the election side, and Trump won't give up. It's going to be a very different situation we're talking about this time next year than any of this stuff, court cases. Right. We're not going to talk about that.
Definitely taking back the time you gave up in your opening statement there. couple of other quick topics. It's not obviously just a presidential election. Congressional election is going to be very important too. And I want to, anybody want to quickly, it looks like, maybe Jim will disagree with this, or Van will disagree with this. The Senate field strongly favors the Republicans this time around. I don't see many people thinking there's likely to be any, unless somehow something really changes, obviously, between now and then. House is obviously much more competitive. Paul, since you have direct experience of this body of Congress, what do you expect, and how will that impact whoever wins the election?
We'll get West Virginia, we'll get Montana. I think we got a really good chance of getting Pennsylvania, Nevada, Ohio. And I feel good about Wisconsin, pretty good. It's going to be tough. And heck, Arizona, we could win there. So we're going to win the Senate. I'd be shocked if we don't win the Senate. It's just the question is how big. The House is a total coin toss. It's a total crapshoot. It's 40 seats in play. They could go in any which way. It really is a flip a coin on the House.
And you don't fancy Speaker Johnson's job, having your old job back?
Yeah. No, Mike's doing great. He is. He's actually stepping up and doing the right thing. He's become a good leader.
Do you anything on the congressional? Do you agree with Paul? You probably don't agree they're going to win all those Senate seats.
Well,
but
look,
generally, it's a tough field.
It's the toughest map. I ran Senate races for 15 years for the White House. It's the toughest Senate map Democrats have had in 20 years. 2022 was the first year in American 100 years where no incumbent United States senator lost. Democrats need to have that happen again. They need to hold all their incumbents. That's really hard. When you look at the court cases and the redistricting, the House would tilt a little bit today towards the Democrats, although we're going to be 10, 15 votes either way. And, whether or not they can have a governing majority. Speaker Ryan ran a governing majority. They do not have a governing majority right now. I agree with you. Johnson's done as well as he could do by making deals with Democrats and not caring about the political price. But it's going to be, America wants divided government, and they're likely going to get it.
All right, a couple of other quick questions which came up from the audience, and Kellyanne, I'm going to put this one to you, not least because it's about the vice presidential nomination, not least because someone wondered if Donald Trump might pick you as his vice presidential nominee. And so first of all, give you the opportunity to say yes or no, and an LBJ style, you will not serve.
Do I look 35?
Or whatever. But secondly, quickly, you don't have to tip us off here to who it's going to be. Nobody really knows. But very quickly, who do you think are the most likely? I wrote an op-ed in
the New York Times 2 months ago. You can pull it up. It's called "Who Should President Trump's Number 2 Be?" Had 15 names on there, but I emphasized that what is more important than who? You have to come up with the job description. I'm the worst matchmaker, worst yenta in the world. Don't even bother asking me. Disaster. But the one I got right was Donald Trump and Mike Pence. And Mike Pence, yes, he mollified the evangelicals, the Federalist Society, judicial types, but he came from the blue wall area. Hillary's blue wall was very real. That was a geographic play. We made a play for those Rust Belt and upper Midwest states, very significantly states that Obama carried twice with more than 50% of the vote, but that had elected a Republican statewide for Senate and or governor in the Obama years. So they're like, okay, they're not allergic to Republicans. This time it's different. I think everything else being equal, which it never is, President Trump should not pick a woman. He should pick a person of color. He's going to have monster returns, not least of which everything Van correctly pointed out. He's going to have monster returns among Hispanic and probably African Americans, particularly males. And I think somebody like a Marco Rubio, Tim Scott, he's looking at Byron Donalds, a congressman he's fond of from the Naples area, Pitbull on TV, et cetera. Somebody's ready on day one. Mike Pompeo, the aforementioned Marco Rubio, Bill Hagerty, I would put on the list, Tom Cotton. There are people who are ready on day one. I'd love for him to pick a woman, but there's two words that haven't been said in an hour here. Kamala Harris. And people who are excited about her don't even mention her name anymore. And we are paying the cost and the consequence daily as a nation for Joe Biden sounding like a sophomore co-ed boy at the end of a frat party, keg party in a frat house on a Saturday night. I need a woman, I need a woman, I need a woman. That sounds great. But
Does that
anyway,
work?
I say this because I think he should do it. And by the way, if he picks a white man, who cares? We need competence. And I think Kamala Harris, she was your attorney general here in California. She's a senator, I got it. She's the highest ranking African-American female elected official in the country at the time. But most days it says the vice president has nothing on her official schedule. How can this be? So I think Trump's got an embarrassment of riches. If I were a Democrat, I would have gotten rid of Biden and Harris about a year and a half ago, rolled the dice, and gotten back to be the party of young people who are outsiders as the nominees.
Can I have 30 seconds on this?
Yeah, go on.
I want to talk about him for a second. When Mitt Romney picked him, I panicked because I thought he was the perfect pick from the perfect place, age, all those things. Then I went and did the numbers, and over the last 50 years, including the big picks like LBJ, Sarah Palin on the other side, et cetera, the VP matters 0.8% to the entire ticket, and we won Paul Ryan's congressional district.
Yeah.
No, you didn't win the district. You won the state.
No, we won.
No, no.
I'll bet you $5.
I bet he knows.
Has anybody had Google by now? We can probably check this.
But it just, voters, again, these economic voters we're talking about, they don't think of, oh my gosh, he picked a black man or she picked a black woman. They think, which of these two presidents are better for me on economic issues? It's just.
But if I may say, Jim, there's a particular question with Kamala Harris, if I may. No, which is that Joe Biden is an old man. There are lots of doubts about whether he'll complete a second term.
Because I was going to go exactly there.
So that's the question.
Which is just, you cannot get a voter to care. Voters don't think about it that way. And every moment she spends talking about Kamala Harris is good for Joe Biden because she's off message. And so this is exactly that. And I know this because I freaked out about Paul Ryan for a year of my life. So it just doesn't
But again,
matter.
my point is, isn't there a difference when you have Kamala,
Not if
when
you
you have a president?
2.6 jobs, Jerry. They don't.
Look, Jim, I've looked up the numbers.
No, when you think the guy's not going to finish his term, it makes a difference.
Yeah, exactly.
How many people think Joe Biden's going to finish
She's
his
less
term?
popular than he is.
Actuarially speaking, an 81-year-old man
It makes a
has like
difference.
a 10% chance of dying every year.
Great. Jerry, does the Wisconsin voter look at an actuarial table? Are you kidding me?
I don't know. I'm asking you.
It matters more in this case than most others because of
Right,
his age.
but do you think it's going to be determinative?
No.
Of course
Okay.
not.
Anybody else? Van, do you want to weigh in on this quickly before we wrap up? Chris?
I'll pass on that one.
You know,
Let's elevate
I love-
the
I
tone
love
from
Kam-
the frat
I love-
boy keg party. Can we?
Look, I love Kamala. Kamala and I came up together in Bay Area politics. She and Gavin and myself were all in the same kind of group. I was like the left-wing berserkly radical, and they were like the establishment people running for office. So it lets you know how left-wing the Bay Area is when Kamala and Gavin are the conservatives. But I do think that if people had more confidence in Kamala, that Biden's age would come up less. Because I do think that people think that Biden's not going to make it the whole way. And I think if people had more confidence in Kamala, and I think she's, I think there's reason to have more confidence in her, but people don't have it. If people had more confidence in Kamala, I think the age issue would go way down. But I think that that's the way that the VP is functioning. I'll put it this way, if Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson were vice president, nobody would be talking about Biden's age. So.
He should have picked Karen Bass.
Very good.
He should have picked Karen Bass.
There are other people who
Or
people
Val
have
Demings.
more
You should have
confidence.
picked who? Sorry, Paul?
Karen Bass.
I
He should
think
have
that's
picked
fair.
Karen Bass. She would have been
I think it's fair to say if people had more confidence in Kamala, I think they should have more confidence.
Thank
If
you
they
for
did
being
have more
honest.
confidence,
Yeah.
the age issue would go down.
We're out of time, but I'm Chris. I'm going to give you, since you haven't weighed in on any of these very important topics about the vice presidency, I'm not going to ask you to weigh in on that. I'm just going to ask you to give us our final word, especially from the perspective of someone who's worked in administration, the kind of challenges that we face.
Oh, I just think the most important thing, because I lived through a contested election last time and I had to manage the transition from one administration to the other, whoever wins, I want them to win by a large amount.
Okay.
A nation unites. Thank you very much. Thank you all for being here. Thanks very much to our panel.
Get that done.